Power cuts continue to have a detrimental impact on farming. A shocking image on social media this week showed a chicken house with thousands of dead chickens on the ground. The Northwest farm in question had lost tens of thousands of chickens due to blackouts. The owner is planning on taking legal action against Eskom. Agri-businesses are suffering, and a food crisis may be on the horizon should the situation continue. As much as Eskom appeals for patience and tolerance with every power alert issued, the very real consequences of rolling blackouts are worsening by the day. Let's discuss this further with Dr. Tracy Davids from the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy. Dr. Davids, thank you so much for your time this evening. Now, irrigation farmers, dairy farms, cold chain storage, agro-processing, pack houses, the entire agricultural value chain is affected by power cuts. What does the picture look like at the moment? Is it extremely concerning, or are there still factors that can be mitigated?
Yeah, I think it's always concerning. As you say, there's a number of industries influenced at a number of levels in the value chain, so it is always a concern. I think at this point, our farmers have proved themselves very resilient, very innovative. They're good at making plans, but they're also running out of plans. So I think there are challenges at this point. I think it's more cost related than serious availability concerns at the moment. But it's certainly adding a lot of risk for our producers, which already face a number of other risks. It's adding significant cost of production in an environment where production costs are already high due to a number of other factors. So load shedding is a big factor to consider, but it's not the only factor. It comes on top of a number of other factors, and things like food inflation, etc., is already high, and all of this is only contributing to make it even higher.
Let's talk briefly about water. Now, irrigation farmers lose their water quota if they don't use it, and currently they're unable to pump the necessary water from sources during load shedding. So what could the long-term knock-on effects be for these farmers if power cuts continue indefinitely?
Yeah, I think it differs quite significantly depending on the various subsectors. So of course, some of them use irrigation more intensively than others. If you think of a commodity like maize, we're looking at about 10% of production that occurs under irrigation. If you look at fresh produce, that's a lot higher. If you think of things like vegetables, many of your perishable products that are cold chain dependent as well. And then, of course, things like fruit, which are a high share of which is exported, which are labor-intensive industries that employ a lot of people. And of course, if these businesses struggle more and more, this has knock-on effects. If in an industry that employs a number of people, then you start to see people losing jobs, losing income, which then puts you in a much more difficult situation. We already have high and rising food prices. So if we take a knock on income as well, which is happening across the value chain, and also infecting employees, then it's a double problem.
So we're looking at possible chicken shortages because chicken farmers have had to cull millions of chicks. How severe is the impact expected to be on the poultry industry?
So the poultry industry is an interesting one. Of course, much of the production happens in a controlled environment, so it is highly dependent on electricity, but also through the value chain. So as I understand it, the biggest challenge to date has been at abattoir level. So, if you're missing shifts at abattoir level, you're not slaughtering the volumes that you should be, then it means you can't take in new chickens. That means that your producers on farm, though they have enough chickens that they've been producing, they now have to keep them longer, which of course has a cost implication because they have to feed them longer, and also implies that they can't place new chicks within the cycle that they normally do, because you need to sell the older ones, get everything cleaned out, and then you place the new cycle. So this is a challenge that started at abattoir level, then spilled back into farm level, and at the end of the day, we ended with around 10 million eggs not being placed into the hatchery. So of course, this has a significant impact on production, but just to give some context to that, it's a big industry. It produces 1.7 million tons a year. Typically slaughters around 20 million chicks a week. So if you're talking 10 million chicks within the bigger production context, that's around half a week's of placements that couldn't be done, that essentially got lost. As I understand it, it is getting better. They have caught up a number of these cycles. So the supply at the moment has improved compared to, say, December and early January. But of course, the longer it continues, it remains a challenge. So, if you're missing shifts, there's a cost associated with that. If you're starting up generators to avoid losing those shifts, then there's additional costs associated with that. So some of the big producers are talking about around 75 cents per kilogram, additional in terms of production costs. And of course, ultimately, that will influence the price of the product for your consumers.
And we've already seen some fast food outlets closing some of their outlets just because, they simply can't keep up with power cuts. And of course, the impact is not just going to be felt for the consumer in terms of poultry. Are fears of food shortages a little melodramatic, or are they justified given there's such a wide variety of produce that is affected by power cuts?
It's hard to tell. Obviously, as I said, every industry is different. And I think, how long the power cuts and to what extent they continue will have a significant influence on that. As things stand at the moment, I think it's a significant cost implication. It's a significant revenue and profit implication throughout the value chain. But at the moment, food shortages aren't, in my view, a major concern. Of course, that's not to say that it can't become one. If the current situation continues indefinitely, but at the moment it's more of a cost issue, which is not insignificant, and an income issue, as opposed to an availability issue yet.
So you've also touched on the export market, and we know that when producers are not able to keep products within the cold storage chain, their produce might not meet or pass international standards, so there's an export implication as well. We know that farmers, organised agriculture bodies, organisations, agricultural economists, a lot of people have met with Minister Tokododiza to ask that the government exempt farmers and producers from power cuts. Do you know what's been the level of progress, what the feedback from government is, and whether this is a viable solution in any event?
Yeah, at this point, unfortunately not. I know that there's a lot of ongoing discussions. Ourselves, we also have part of our team involved in a technical capacity and in providing input into that. There is a lot happening. There's a lot of discussions ongoing. There's a lot of options being evaluated, but it takes some time to implement these. So as of now, there's nothing that I can tell you yet in terms of decisions that have been made. I know there's a lot of options being evaluated, looking at more flexible load shedding schedules to allow irrigation, for instance, to continue to protect the cold chain. I think everyone realizes the severity of the situation, and I think everyone's pulling together to try and solve the problem and to get solutions. Ultimately, what needs to happen to solve the problem is to solve the electricity crisis. But in the interim, in the short term, everyone's pulling together and trying hard to find solutions that could be viable to mitigate the short-term impact.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tracy Davids from the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy. And go back to the start of the interview where Dr. Tracy Davids said that our farmers are incredibly resilient, and they are. And we should all be thankful and mindful at this point in time. If we think load shedding or power cuts are a hassle, an irritant, or are putting pressure on businesses, they're putting so much pressure on the agricultural sector as well. Hopefully some progress to be made there soon.